Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist teaching at the University of Colorado Boulder, previously UC Berkeley and UCLA. I'm surprised how many people ask me to talk about this, but in this video I'm going to cover a very frequently asked question, which is about the particular form that my education and career path took. Whether or not anyone wants to try to duplicate that path, whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know. Whether that's even possible or not, I don't know, because a lot of it is pure chance. But I'll give you the basic details. So I grew up all over the West, although I've traditionally regarded Colorado and Wyoming as home. Don't make me choose between them. And by high school, I was in Texas, and so I went to Texas Tech University, which is not a technical school in spite of the tech in its name. The tech is entirely superficial. People ask about that. And I studied classics, Greek and Latin. That was my major, and my minor was linguistics. Now, my thinking in doing this was I wanted to study historical linguistics in graduate school, and the best way to prepare for that would be to get more of a background in ancient languages, Greek and Latin being what were on offer at Texas Tech. So that's what I did. And then I went to the University of Georgia for my master's degree in linguistics. I specialized in historical linguistics, studying under the magnificent Jared Klein there, who I believe is still there and still teaching. And he advised me, I don't think there's any impropriety in repeating his advice, that either I continue at the PhD level studying linguistics with a specialization in a particular group of languages, or studying a particular group of languages and specializing in linguistics. In other words, in my case, since I was very interested in the history of the Scandinavian languages, be the Scandinavian guy at linguistics conferences, or be the linguist at Scandinavian conferences. I chose more or less the latter, and I applied at departments of Scandinavian studies, of which there are a few offering graduate programs in the United States. Berkeley, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Harvard, and Washington, i.e. Seattle, are, I believe, the programs that exist. Anyway, that's where I applied, and I wound up sitting at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with Kirsten Wolf, and she guided me through my PhD. I spent 2 years on coursework, and then I spent, 4 years as a dissertator. One of those years I remained in Madison, but then the last 3 of those years I actually was hired at UCLA as faculty while I was still completing my PhD with the University of Wisconsin 2,000 miles away. Academia is weird. But another thing about how academia is weird is I was teaching full-time at UCLA those 3 years, but I was on only 1-year contracts, so I never really knew until the summer whether the job was going to continue. And I was teaching as a replacement for a tenured professor who was no longer teaching. So, we always had to see if he was going to come back or not to see if I would have a job the next year. Not a particularly stable way to live. And finally, of course, that individual was no longer on leave, and so my job ended. And so that summer I went looking for employment. Now what's kind of odd about this is that, of course, I've been teaching for 3 years at UCLA without a PhD. I was a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin, but I had not yet defended my dissertation. I actually defended my dissertation at the end of spring in 2014. I went to Wisconsin, defended my dissertation, and I came back to UCLA and found out that I wasn't going to have that job the next year. So as far as I knew, my academic career actually ended when I got my PhD rather than began. And of course, it was late in the year. I was unable to find academic work. Part of what I discovered is that what your terminal degree is in, what your last diploma says you have a degree in, really affects the departments you can work in. Some community colleges and smaller colleges and universities have actually rules, apparently, that if you were going to be hired in, say, an English department, even though I had taught basically English classes and literature and composition, you have to have a degree that says English on it or composition on it. And of course, my PhD diploma says Scandinavian Studies. with a specialization in philology, which, you know, it can be difficult to convince anyone, even in a university setting, of what that means or that it's relevant to what they need. So the work I was able to find that year 2014 to 15 was at a small museum in a wonderful town in Riverton, Wyoming. I worked there for a year, and then I was hired at UC Berkeley, so another university in the University of California system, on another one-year appointment. That was 2015 to 16, and then that was renewed in 2016-17. And then in February 2017, and of course this whole time, you know, beginning in my third year, I think, of being a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, I've been applying for jobs constantly. That's just part of the academic lifestyle. You're constantly applying for jobs. And I kept an eye out, of course, in Colorado and Wyoming. It was always where I wanted to be, but I thought it was unrealistic to think the Old Norse job at the University of Colorado would ever open up for me. I mean, it just the random chance wasn't going to happen. Oddly enough, it did. And so in February 2017, I interviewed for that job, and I got it. And so in August 2017, I came to the University of Colorado Boulder. That job is not tenured or tenure-track. Tenure is increasingly rare. Of course, part of that probably has to do with how it has been abused, and I have seen some serious abuses. Part of it is just, you know, funding. It's cheaper to pay people who aren't tenured, and so every university competing with every other university has trended away from awarding new tenure lines. So I don't know whether to encourage people to try to follow these trains or not, but that is the particular career path that I have followed, both in education and then in teaching, and sometimes concurrently, because of course I was a dissertator at the same time that I was teaching at UCLA. Pretty strange situation, student at one school and faculty at another, full-time faculty at another. And in fact, most of the money I owe on my student loans, I owe for the years that I was teaching at UCLA, because Wisconsin wouldn't give me financial aid because I was getting a paycheck from another university. Of course, California is extremely expensive. And while California is beautiful and there are fine people and the students were fantastic, you know, it's not my country. And I always did want to get back to the Rockies, and so I'm glad that I've had that opportunity thanks to the University of Colorado. And of course, it was the necessity of living in such an expensive place in California that got me looking at alternative sources of income, which eventually led me to starting this YouTube channel to try to get people interested in my translations, for instance, of the Poetic Edda and the Saga of the Volsungs, and then eventually to start a Patreon account, which has been very helpful. My biggest advice to anyone who wants to get into higher education is to have some kind of backup skill, something else you can be hired at that is easier to explain to an employer in times of economic difficulty. Because even my other skills are not necessarily extremely career driven. I mean, like sharpshooting or whatever, it's cool, but nobody's going to pay you for it. You can win a little bit of money in contests. Anyway, I hope that's been somewhat interesting or informative for some of you. And from beautiful Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.